March 11th marks 1 year since the WHO declared the virus a pandemic, and everything changed. To mark the occasion, President Biden is set to give his first primetime speech tonight. President Biden just signed his $1.9 trillion relief bill into law today. Republicans and Democrats still fiercely disagree about the stimulus. Republicans say now the country will pay the price. And many are wondering how states with stricter lockdowns fared compared to those with looser rules. A new poll seeks to find those answers. Tune into Deep Dive as we explore these topics and more. Hello and welcome. This is Deep Dive and I'm Tiffany Meier. 1 year ago today, the WHO declared the virus a pandemic, and everyone's lives changed. If you'd like a run-through on the timeline, head over to China and Focus tonight. We'll also touch on how the Chinese regime covered up the early stages. And to mark the date, President Biden is set to make his first primetime address since taking office. It's been 50 days since he took office, and there have been rising calls about his absence. Many also note he has yet to give a State of the Union address, which are usually given in late January or February. Under Article 2, Section 3 of the U.S. Constitution, it states the president shall, quote, from time to time give to Congress information of the State of the Union, and recommend to their consideration such measures as he shall judge necessary and expedient. The purpose of a State of the Union serves as a way for the president to lay out accomplishments and hopes for the future. It's held in front of the joint sessions of Congress and dates back to George Washington, the first president of the U.S. Biden's first press conference is also still up in the air with no date set yet. It's a break from tradition. Former President Trump held his first press conference 28 days into his presidency. Obama had his 21 days in office, and George W. Bush held his 34 days after being in office. So what is Biden expected to cover in his first solo speech tonight? Since it is a year since the nation shut down in response to the virus, the pandemic is expected to be a large part. According to the Washington Post, senior White House advisor Anita Dunn says it's a speech about where we've been, where we are, and where we can be. White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki says Biden will, quote, discuss the many sacrifices the American people have made on the last year, adding he will look forward, highlighting the role that Americans will play in beating the virus and moving the country toward getting back to normal. And the Associated Press says Biden will use the opportunity to offer hope to the nation. His speech is expected to be at 8 p.m. Eastern Time. Biden is expected to touch on the massive virus relief package, which he signed into law today, a day earlier than expected. Biden's Chief of Staff Ron Klain wrote on Twitter saying the president would sign it a day earlier than planned so as to move as fast as possible. This comes after the House passed the $1.9 trillion relief package yesterday. The vote was 220 to 211. All Democrats voted for the bill, except Representative Jared Golden. No Republicans voted for the bill. Golden issued a statement explaining why he voted against. He writes, during challenging times, the country needs its elected leaders to work together to meet the most urgent needs in their communities. This bill addresses urgent needs and then buries them under a mountain of unnecessary or untimely spending. In reviewing the bill in its full scope, less than 20% of the total spending addresses core COVID challenges that are immediately pressing: funding for vaccine distribution and testing, and emergency federal unemployment programs. He goes on to say, I support these portions of the bill wholeheartedly and believe we should do more for the people hardest hit by the pandemic by continuing to extend unemployment programs until economic indicators show they are no longer necessary. He went on to say, unfortunately, the path congressional leaders have chosen goes far beyond these key provisions. To the tune of hundreds of billions of dollars, after supporting $4 trillion in emergency COVID relief in 2020, I won't support trillions more in funding that is poorly targeted or in many cases not necessary at this moment in time. It's a line many Republicans are using, saying the package is both excessive and wasteful. Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell says he thinks the stimulus bill is, quote, one of the worst pieces of legislation I've seen passed here in the time I've been in the Senate. Republicans note only 1% of the bill is for vaccines, and only 9% is for health care. The Senate passed the bill over unanimous Republican opposition last weekend. The updated version took out the $15 minimum wage hike, narrowed the eligibility for direct payments, and has a $300 weekly unemployment aid through September 6th. Among other aid, individuals making less than $80,000 or families making less than $160,000 can get the $1,400 stimulus check. Biden posted a tweet saying help is here. But Republicans criticized the hyper-partisan vote. Representative Ann Wagner said it's shameful Democrats have disregarded their obligation to provide real COVID relief to the American people and are instead attempting to use this process to jam through partisan agenda items. This bill is not targeted, timely, or tied to COVID. We need to focus on solving the critical issues at hand: getting vaccines to Americans, providing relief to our local businesses, restaurants, and entertainment venues, and supporting those who have been seriously impacted by this pandemic. Democrats pointed out Republicans have done the same thing in the past, adding they broke no rules by doing this. Some saying it would provide much-needed relief. Representative Salud Carbajal said on the House floor this bill invests $20 billion to get shots in arms and make sure everyone knows where, when, and how to get a vaccine. Many students are back in school or going back soon. California will get $15 billion to reopen safely and keep schools open to make up for lost time. But Republicans are concerned about tax hikes. The Biden administration has signaled it could introduce general tax increases to help pay for the stimulus. That includes raising the federal corporate tax rate to 28%, up from 21%. Progressives criticize former President Trump's previous tax cuts, saying they mostly benefited the rich. But some economists believe the cuts created prosperity and opportunity for all Americans. Now, the conservative-leaning Tax Foundation says Biden's tax proposal would raise the U.S. federal-state combined tax rate to over 32%. That would make it the highest among G7 nations. Senior policy analyst Garrett Watson told the Epoch Times, "This is the last thing we want to do as the U.S. recovers from the pandemic." The Tax Foundation says Biden's tax hike would reduce long-term economic output, eliminate about 160,000 jobs, and reduce wages. Now let's touch on states rolling back lockdowns. New York, New Jersey, and Maryland are easing their virus restrictions. Starting off with New York City and New Jersey, the two states will be expanding restaurant capacity to 50% starting March 19th. For restaurants in New York State outside of the city, the capacity will be extended to 75%. And starting Friday at 5 p.m., Maryland is lifting all capacity limits on restaurants, gyms, and other businesses. The only remaining restrictions are as follows. Restaurants and bars still need to follow social distancing, and large spaces are capped at 50%. Maryland still has its mask mandate. How are the states with stricter lockdowns faring compared to those with looser ones? A new poll seeks those answers. A new poll from Just the News Daily-Scott Rasmussen poll shows most voters think states that impose stricter lockdowns to curb the spread of COVID have done worse economically than those that remained more open. The Rasmussen poll shows that 53% of respondents agreed with the statement that states with imposed strict lockdowns generally had more economic problems than states with fewer restrictions. 21% disagreed, and 26% said they are not sure. The survey of 1,200 registered voters was conducted by Scott Rasmussen using a mixed mode approach from March 4th to 6th. The outbreak of the CCP virus prompted near universal restrictions, though some states were more restricted than others. Red states like South Dakota, Florida, and Texas lean towards greater individual discretion. Their Republican leaders stress personal responsibility over top-down mandates, stay-at-home orders, and business lockdowns. Federal employment data supports the findings of the poll that lockdown states generally did worse. The top 3 states, all Republican-led with the lowest unemployment rates in 2020, were Nebraska, South Dakota, and Utah, while blue states occupy the bottom rungs. South Dakota Governor Kristi Noem says COVID didn't crush the economy, government crushed the economy. Her remarks came at this year's Conservative Political Action Conference, or CPAC, in Orlando, Florida last month. Her state was the only state that never ordered any businesses or churches to close, never imposed a lockdown or a mask mandate, and refrained from classifying businesses into essential and non-essential categories. Noem has become the target of establishment media and Democratic politicians for her approach. She went on to say just as quickly, government turned around and held itself out as the savior. And frankly, the Treasury Department can't print money fast enough to keep up with Congress's wishes. But not everyone has followed this path. Noem says she advised people to take common sense precautions against this common enemy. She says her administration looked at the science, the data, and the facts. And then we took a balanced approach. She says as a result, South Dakota now has the lowest unemployment rate in the nation and that the state's economy is booming. South Dakota had fewer COVID-19 cases per million people over the past 30 days than some of the biggest lockdown states, including California, New York, New Jersey, and Pennsylvania. But what do you think? Let me know below. Thanks for tuning in to Deep Dive. I'm Tiffany Meier, and see you soon.